Oh, we're live. Awesome. We're live. Okay. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Techbiz. Thank you for joining us again. We are very, very happy to see my very good friend here today. I'm so happy. I've not seen him in a long time. Welcome, everyone. Today is the 79th episode of TechBiz. TechBiz is a webinar where we weekly, we get to talk about all the things that matter to us, all the things that matter to us as entrepreneurs, or people who have the expertise, who have the training, who have the experience in different aspects of building a business. We bring them to this show to talk to us we that we are building our business from scratch, or we are the aspiring entrepreneurs. So just come and talk to us about things that they know about and how we can be able to get our businesses from where they are right now to where they want them to be. Right. That's if you're doing it for the first time. Right. So my name is Edwin Ajogun. I'm the country director for Eco Innovation Center, based in Ikoyi, 50 Awolowo Way, Ikoyi. And we do this every week, Thursday at 5 p.m. And we bring in different people from the HR to the legal to business development, products, everybody. Even sometimes we bring in politicians. Okay, it's okay. We do that once in a while. So because everybody's important, right? So today we have a very unique and special guest who's going to be talking about startups from a very, very unique angle. But it's an angle that affects everybody, right? When you talk about politics, when you talk about policies, everybody's like, oh, that's APC, PDP. But these things are things that matter to us, right? Because I'll give you a very good example. Gokada and the Gokada mobility brouhaha that happened, was it last year or 2 years ago? And when a lot of investors brought in a lot of money and invested in mobility, they bought a lot of bikes, and so many things happened. And with one policy change like this, everything was gone. Right. So this is why we need to be involved. We need to just have a finger on the pulse of everything that's going on in government, everything that's going on in our lives. That's in our local government, in our state government, in the federal government. We need to know because no matter how much we build, we are one policy away from our business dying. That's the truth. And we need to be able to be involved in the decision making process with our politicians, with our local politicians, just to make sure that they have our interests and they can hear our voices and they can, communicate our interests to the highest level of government, right? Like I said, I'm Edna Jogo. I'm the director for Economic Innovation Center. Um, Please follow us on all our social media handles. Somebody's going to post the links on this chat box. You can follow us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, on now on Twitter because well, thank God, it finally happened. We are back on Twitter, but we after we're going to listen to our speaker today. He's going to speak for like 15, 20, for like 30, 45 minutes. And we have an opportunity to ask questions. You can drop your questions in the text box. You can ask questions. You can raise your hand if you want to speak. I mean, if you can, or not, just talk to us. Let's get it, but let's make it more interactive, right? I'm really, really interested in knowing what you think. And if you are watching us, if you're not on the air meeting, you're watching on any of our streams on any of our channels, please, if you want to ask a question, just ask a question. Just put a question in the comment section of anywhere you are, and we will definitely read it out for. We will definitely read it out here and get feedback from our speaker. Right. So, just want to get into our speaker for today. Is a very, very, very. Is someone that we've worked together before. We've had a long-standing relationship. Went to the same school, have a long-standing relationship, and I've followed his progress over a couple of years now, and he's done fantastic. He's been very, very influential. For someone that's this young in Nigerian politics and policy making, and I think he's someone that I would have loved to be. I would like to be when I come back in this life again. You get so. So, so he's done so well. His name is Jude Feranmi. Is very big on policies and very big on politics. And honestly, I didn't even know it was CEO until today. I thought it was good to put politician as his job description, but that's fine. So Jude is the CEO of Republicraft Consultancy. They're committed to development and democracy consulting that delivers cutting-edge research, carefully articulated programs, and evidence-based policy advisory for clients who may be local and international NGOs, state or national governments. He's the owner of, he's the convener, sorry, of the Raising New Voices initiatives, who seek to bring together new voices amongst Nigerian youth through citizen engagement and political participation to make Nigeria the knowledge and technological capital of the world. He has more than 7 years' experience in community organizing and relations, starting from his university days. I am a witness to that. His experience also includes organizing volunteers in Lagos State and social peace worker in the Niger Delta region for enough is enough Nigeria for more than 15 months. He's an incurable optimist who is stupid not to create the future he wants to see today, and he's married. He's married. Yeah, I know. That was there. So it's my utmost pleasure. It's my utmost pleasure. My absolute pleasure. I hope your people from Raising New Voices are watching, because they need to be here. I hope they are watching. So it's my pleasure to introduce to us Mr. Jude Feranmi. Jude, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Edwin. I mean, you've done so a generous introduction. Thank you very much.
You didn't talk about your master's degree, sir. You're so humble.
Anyways, we'll get back to that at some point.
Okay. Awesome.
So yeah, let me thank you, Edwin, for having me here. I'm really grateful to be speaking at a co-innovation center. I've blown, like I've arrived. Yes, to go straight into, I mean, I have 30 minutes, I believe.
Yeah, 35 minutes.
All right, awesome. As much as possible, please, for the backend team, I would like this to be interactive. So if there are any questions from anybody, please let's bring them on board. Happy to answer them as we go. So please don't wait for me to finish my presentation before you feel like you want to throw in a question.
Yeah. Sorry, can you just state the title of today's? I didn't mention it. Today's is innovation policies and the impact on the startup ecosystem. That's today's topic.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I want to try something first and then see if it works. Then we. Can you hear me like this?
Yeah. It's even clearer now, sir.
Awesome. All right. So let's get into this conversation. First of all, thanks for the introduction, Edwin. I will tell you what Republicraft does. We're a public policy consulting company, and usually working with international NGOs who are trying to do evidence-based advocacy. What that means is I want startups to start getting $1 million every year in Nigeria. And as maybe I for policy as an organization wants to advocate that as a bill to pass, they have to think and say, where is the research that says if we give our startups in the country $1 million, our economy would be boosted by 50% after 2 years? That research needs to be done, and that's what you call evidence-based advocacy. So at Republicraft, we do that. We also do public policy consulting with governments. And an example of a very proud example that we are proud to be associated with is the Nigerian Digital Innovation and Entrepreneurship Startup Policy. I don't know if a number of people within the ecosystem know that there is a policy like that exists in the country that is tailored specifically for startups. But it's called NDIE EPS. It's a policy document that will work with the Federal Ministry of Communications and Digital Economy to formulate and to validate. The entire policy process goes all the way from you have an idea of what you want to do, which is the research part. and then you set the agenda and say this is how exactly. So why, for example, agenda setting here is why should we give startups $1 million and not $2 million? And that's part of what we do, and we're very proud to be associated with that policy. I will go a bit into it because that's what we're talking about today. And finally, we definitely also get involved in advocacy ourselves with the sister organization, raising new voices, which is what Edwin mentioned earlier. I have a double master's degree in innovation policy from the United Nations University in the Netherlands, and a few certificates of competence from MIT, Success, or Institute of Technology in Geneva. And I am passionate about innovation because it's on a good day, it's the lifeblood of any economy. But again, like I said, we'll get into that. Today's conversation, and I asked when I was thinking about today's conversation, the awesome team that Edwin has at AIC, who the audience is going to be. And they mentioned to me that some will be VCs, tech startups, startup CEOs, engineers. So the conversation today would be a broad conversation, if you may, to help us understand the impact on the startup ecosystem of innovation policies that exist in Nigeria today, and how we can make the best of it, irrespective of whoever we are, and however we are playing within the ecosystem. So first things first, what is innovation? And a lot of people here, I mean, for startup ecosystem in Nigeria today, a lot of people know that building software or writing code is innovation. But that's not where innovation starts and stops. Innovation is much, much broader than that. It is, in a way, the combination of creativity to do something better. That's the simplest way I can define it. I mean, there's Joseph Schumpeter, who was the first economist in the world to bring about that idea and how it affects and show how it affects economic growth of any country. There's also Clay Christensen, who co-authored with our own Nigerian innovator that wrote Prosperity Paradox. Remind me of his name again. The Prosperity Paradox, written by Ojomo Edward, I think. I've forgotten his name, God. But Clay Christensen is also another authority when it comes to innovation, and he has a definition for innovation. But broadly speaking, and this is why, for everybody who is listening, we need to understand this fundamental point to be able to attach it to whatever it is we're doing, our startups, our companies, our capital funds. Innovation fundamentally affects every sector of the economy. So how do we make clothes in a faster manner? And then somebody was asking that question, and then the spin wheel was invented. And then at that time, if you wanted to make a piece of clothing, you had to spend about 4 days and maybe 3 housemaids or housewives, as the case may be, to knit all the cotton together to be able to make one piece of clothing. And somebody thought about how that could be better and then invented something to make that better. Now, it didn't stop her. Now we can make clothes 4 times faster than we can. But it went all the way to we now have more clothes and can supply more demand for people who needed clothes. That meant that people felt more warmer during winter because they now had access to buying new clothes that could serve them compared to the old clothes that they had. So and innovation affects the entire gamut of society. And I'll give another example, a much more recent example. Nigeria's economy, when you think about Nigeria's GDP, a lot of people see a spike between 2000 and 2005, I mean, if you look at the charts, I really wish I could have presented that. If you look at the charts, you see a spike between 2005 2006 compared to 2008, 9, 11. And at times, there is a lot of explanation that people are trying to explain that what is responsible for the spike. You know, Nigeria just came back to democracy from military rule, so property rights and rule of law. You think about all of those things, but there was an innovation that was very, very prominent during this period. I mean, a number of reasons that you can ascribe to that spike, but two things collided. The communications industry in the country was revolutionized by GSM, like they say, that Obasanjo brought to Nigeria. That made it very, very easy for people to communicate using their mobile phones, even though it was still very, very expensive. But the problem that innovation was solving for the Nigerian economy was not just that if I want to call Edwin, I have to go to the queue lines in Nitel to go and pick up the phone and call him. I could now call Edwin on my phone. That's good, right? And that's innovation, and that solves the problem. But fundamentally, it also meant that if I wanted to talk to Edwin on a business issue, I could do that. If I wanted to trade with Edwin for some goods I had, it was now easier to do that. So the turnover rate, the solution of let me pick up my phone and call Edwin and communicate with Edwin was not just impacting on the communications problem that innovation is solving. It's also impacting on the other parts of society, which is trade. In fact, social media is now held responsible for a lot of all the protests and organizing that's happening in the world on the streets. But social media is an innovation to help us, chat and share our own ideas. But in the process of doing that, the innovation of social media in code was able to influence the rest of society. This is the fundamentals. I wanted us to understand these cause and effects relationship between innovation and the rest of the economy and society. Now, a few theories going forward before we get into the practical impact of startups. There's something called a national innovation system. And the national innovation system is an ecosystem of all the players and all the actors that are responsible for the birth and the sustainability of an innovation or an innovative product. So in that innovation, that national innovation system, you also have regional innovation systems. But in any innovation system, covering any geographical area, there are three fundamental pillars. One is, of course, government. The second one is industry. And the third one is academia. The academics are people in the university lecturers and the researchers. But you can, I mean, in Nigeria today, you are probably almost asking how does Nigerian academia impact or participate in our startup ecosystem in the country or innovation ecosystem. We'll get there. The point here is before there can be any innovation, there has to be new knowledge. And the way that civilized society had, or let me put it like this, let me paraphrase the statement and say that the custodians of new knowledge in any society has been trusted with the academicians, people who are in universities and doing research. There are also research institutes who focus basically and solely on research. You put them into that category as well. But overall, the idea here is new knowledge has to be created and then transferred to the industry, who then makes or creates a product out of it that society now benefits from. And between that journey of the academicians and the industry, there is the government that oversees that process. And again, I know this is some theory, but this fundamental relationship, it's what we call the tripartite relationship, or you can also call it the triple helix model, where the government and academicians or custodians of new knowledge and industry players are in a relationship together. And it is I can probably make a blanket statement and say it is the strength of this relationship that determines how innovative a country is. In fact, I think Nigeria currently ranks, and maybe I can ask anybody to Google that and let us know. The Global Innovation Index in the country, in the whole world, ranks countries based on how innovative they are. And the Global Innovation Index uses these three core pillars of national innovation system to determine how strong is that relationship. And that's how society, if a society is innovative, it would have been able to ensure that innovation policies that ensure that new knowledge can constantly be created, and the industry can constantly benefit from that new knowledge to innovate on a process. How do we get our farmers to 10x their current yield? What is it that we need to look at in that input, in that agricultural process to ensure that this innovation gives birth to more yield? Then the researchers go ahead and find out maybe if we use a better seed. What kind of seed should we use, and what seed properties would enable 10x yield for the current Nigerian farmers? Then a research project is launched. Somebody goes into the agricultural nomenclature and a couple of other things. The government funds that, industry funds that, and that process gives birth to, now we have one seed that we know if we plant maize, this one maize seed is going to give us 10 maize trees. And we're going to give it to our farmers, and then our farmers will then convert that seed into 10 maize trees. So along the entire value chain of business, whether it's agriculture or roads or, think about anything, processing, entertainment, whatever it is that comes out as an innovative, complex product, there has to be that journey that government policies and government's relationship between the academia and the industry would have birthed. Having said all of this, I think I've talked about the fundamentals of how innovation policy and how innovation is birthed in any society. You can almost now start to think about your own place within the entire national innovation ecosystem. If you run a startup and you are trying to innovate a product, the first question is your knowledge about that innovation. Where is it coming from? We live in a global world, so at times somebody somewhere has already, created a new code or a new language, a new computer language, and that can help you solve a problem. So that new knowledge is not necessarily coming from Nigeria, right? It's coming from outside the country, but you can apply that new knowledge and create something out of it to solve a problem here in Nigeria. Now, if that's your place in the ecosystem, right? You need to understand that there is a third arm that oversees. I don't want to use the word control, but in practical terms in Nigeria, we almost have that kind of relationship. The government, as the third pillar of any national innovation ecosystem, determines to what extent your startup, for example, can go. And I go back to the example that Edwin made earlier about the mobility tech companies in the country. And how, we were all observing how much money was flowing into that space in Nigeria, especially for Lagos, and how companies were raising millions of dollars only for a single piece of legislation to derail, or let me say, to limit the extent to which that innovation could go ahead with. In fact, by the time that policy was made, there was already conversations around how this kind of innovation that GoCarter and Max.ng and Okada, there was Okada, but there was one other company that OPay was also launching in that mobility tech space. There was already conversation about how can we ensure how can we pitch this kind of innovation to government so that all the Okadas in Lagos are transporting people from one place to another would be at least one of these companies. But the government already made it clear about 2 or 3 years before then that this is the master plan for mobility and transportation in Lagos. And these certain roads would not, bikes would not be allowed to apply in certain roads unless they qualify under these certain laws or under certain criteria rather. So 200cc, a couple of all these kind of criteria that was already met. Now, this is what the innovation policy for. I wouldn't say that was an innovation policy or innovation legislation in itself, but this was the policy of government that limited to what extent any mobility technology company could innovate around that problem in Lagos. And for either good reasons or bad reasons as well. The government of Lagos State, for example, could have a vision about how Lagos City should be perceived by the rest of the world. And this particular innovation, even though it solves a problem, does not fit into that narrative. So practical ideas on how innovation policies affect startup ecosystems or startups in the country would require a robust understanding of how does the government think about where my startup is playing today. So when I was in Europe, I consulted for an institute called the Brightlands Institute. And one of the innovations that the way that they were thinking around was, before I say that, let me say that there is a geographical belt in Europe. It's filled with the chemical industries and the detergents industries, anything that has to do with chemicals and liquids. That belt cuts across a geographical location in Europe and across different countries. So Germany, Netherlands, France, Belgium, all the way. So if there's any innovation that's happening within Europe that's around chemicals and maybe liquid ingredients that is used to create drugs or used for drug production, used for liquid production, used for chemical production, that entire belt, that was where you would find those kind of companies. And Brightlands was one of them. And everything that they did, every program that they did during this period was tailored around this particular program or this particular industry as well. So if as a company, you are operating in a space, there is a need for you to understand and say, how does the government think about this sector or this industry that I'm in right now? Because no matter how innovative one is, it is very, very difficult, or even if not almost impossible, to think the government on a long term. I mean, you can do it immediately. The innovation takes up, like we saw with the mobility technology companies, and by the time it gets to a point, government has the power and the ability to cut down and limit that innovation, no matter how much succor it's bringing to the people in terms of the problem that it's solving. So, first of all, for any my first advice, for example, would be, how does the government think about my sector in terms of solving problems for people? This innovation that my startup has, how can it fit into number one? So the first one is, how can it fit into the narrative of government in terms of their aspirations and the visions that the government has? Number two is, how can I or my company or a group of other companies playing in this space change government's perception about how to think about this industry, right? Because government perceptions do change. And because we're also in democracy, it's also possible for you to change how government thinks about a certain sector. If another governor comes in or another party comes in, so I mean, if you start up playing in that space, you want to start thinking, if this is the kind of innovation that we believe that will benefit our startup or the people? How do we change government's perception about this sector in our country? And the third one is how do we set an agenda for these kinds of innovation to thrive? I'll give another example for that. A lot of fintech companies in the country are very excited about the kind of innovation they're able to bring. You know, there's Piggyverse helping people save. There is Flutterwave helping people send money and pay money and Paystack as well. There are lots of fintech companies right now. In fact, there are fintech companies that are now going into subsectors. So I have a problem in healthcare. I need healthcare loans, for example, and I want to guarantee that I want credit to be able to help me with my healthcare because now it's an emergency, I don't have money. There are fintech companies now trying to even focus just on that. There are fintech trying to focus on SMEs. But do you know that without the CBN policy during, I think, 2008, 2009, under Charles Soludo, when he brought all the banking and finance companies, all the banks in the country to consolidate, and then we had this magic that it's not even probably, it does not exist in Europe, where you could send money from one bank to another bank, and there is now the NIBSS, National Interbank Settlement Systems, right, that ensures that process can go smoothly in a matter of 1 hour. You know, there was this policy reform, there was this policy set in place, and this reform set in place within the banking industry to be able to ensure all of that. And that laid the foundation for all the fintech companies that we're seeing in the country today. Imagine that you are in Europe, right? And you want to send money. I want to send money to Edwin, for example, right? Number one, if Edwin does not use the same bank that I use, that's going to be a very difficult one. It's probably going to take 2 days. The second is, even if we use the same bank, Edwin will not get his money until maybe the end of business today. If I send in the morning, if I send in the evening, Edwin will get his money tomorrow. Now, if you live in that kind of a country, and you are thinking around an innovation or a fintech application that allows you to pay bus drivers, for example. So you have a QR code on your phone, the bus drivers have QR codes, and then you want to pay them. And you live in a country where if the bus driver uses a different app, a different bank, he's not getting his money in the next 2 days. That's innovation, no matter how, which is what we have in Nigeria here, right? That innovation, no matter how beautiful, will not work in that kind of country. So to a very large extent, the policy reform within the banking industry that was done years ago laid the foundation for the fintech companies that we have today, and the kind of innovation that we have today. And that's why you see that in the world, I mean, you can also look this up. In the world, Nigeria is very, 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 like, we rank very, very highly when it comes to financial technology systems in the entire world. I think we're third or fourth to, I think, maybe US, Sweden, Norway, and then Nigeria, because of this kind of policy. So in a nutshell, I've mentioned that one, you start a company, you're thinking around how your innovation benefits people. You also have to be thinking around how does the government currently think about this sector in my country, because your innovation, you could put it out. If the government thinks this is a no-no, you are only going to try for a while, which is the example of our mobility tech company. The second is, how do we change, how can our company or our ecosystem, maybe if you're a health tech company, how can health tech companies start setting the agenda or changing the way that the government thinks about these innovation that we have? And a free example for me would be health insurance, right? I was talking to Dr. Neto, I think last year. Dr. Neto is CEO of Wella Health, and he was telling me that they have a product, an innovation product of malaria insurance. And I mean, you look at that product, you're like, I mean, this is a beautiful product. A lot of Nigerians use malaria. A lot of Nigerians have malaria at least once every year. And if I'm insured for this particular disease or illness, then I can be sure that I don't have to spend out of pocket for that. But this is why this is a very beautiful innovation. Imagine that this is how the Nigerian government is also thinking about health insurance in the country. Today, less than 0.5% of Nigerians are insured in any way, right? If the government starts thinking in this way, then to a very reasonable extent, you can be sure that the demand for this product will increase. And then maybe more health tech companies can say, okay, this is what we're offering. And then boom, Nigeria is the country where people don't have to pay out of pocket. And going back to my earlier definition of innovation, this is what that means. It does not just mean that people will stop paying out of pocket for healthcare costs, because now the government thinks in this particular way, and health tech companies are providing that service. It also means that people now have extra money to spend on other industries. So the money that you would have spent in the hospital paying for malaria drugs and stuff, you would spend on something else. And that boosts the economy or the productivity in that particular sector. I think to a very large extent, these are the fundamental ideas I want to share. And I'm going to end with two things. One is explaining what the Nigerian digital innovation and entrepreneurship policy is, and I challenge every person to go and look for that policy. It is the only policy in Nigeria that I know of that is dedicated solely for startups in Nigeria. I'm glad to have been a part of that, and for Republicraft as well. But the NDIEP tells you how government is thinking about startups, how this Nigerian government is thinking about startups in Nigeria. The second one is Nigerian Startup Bill. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And to buttress my point about the government's thinking, the Nigerian Startup Bill is an offshoot of the Nigerian Digital Innovation and Entrepreneurship Status Policy. One of the recommendations that we have, if you want to implement this policy, what do you do next? Is to write and draft the legislation on startups in the country. So you begin to see that when it concerns your own company or your own capital fund management or your own whatever it is that you're doing in the ecosystem, the way that government thinks about something, and like I said, maybe the theory, I'm saying the way that government thinks because I want to use it in a very simple manner and say it in this very simple manner. The public policy word for that is agenda setting. There is always an agenda. The government has an agenda for startups. Who is setting that agenda, right? And it's not just the federal government. The state government also has an agenda for startups. A local government could also have an agenda for startups. So what is this agenda? Who is setting it? How is the government, the people that are thinking about this policy or this agenda, how are they thinking about it? So without further ado, NDIEPS it has about 5 pillars, 5 strong pillars. And those pillars have to do with talent development. I know that in the ecosystem now, one of our strongest debates these days is talent. It's about talent. How much should an engineer get? Should an engineer be working for 3 startup CEOs at the same time without any one of them knowing? The huge talent gap is a very, very hot debate right now. So talent is one of the core pillars of that policy. Capital as well is one of the very, very strong pillars. And you begin to see that in Nigerian Startup Bill when I talk about it. The Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, and I mean, it's a very good example of that policy here is, of the implementation of that policy here is the raise that Ventures Platform recently announced, $40 million to invest in other startups in $1 million tranches. The NSAI was one of the core partners that invested in that fund. The third one here is research and development. There's a lot to talk about this one. There's a national research fund that's about 8.5 billion every year, and part of the categories, the thematic categories for that national research fund is science, technology, and innovation. And so if you start up, for example, you're thinking about research and development, R&D. Unfortunately, that fund does not go to private sector companies. It goes specifically to researchers in Nigerian universities. But Nigerian university researchers are also able to partner with private companies in carrying out an R&D project. So if you think you need R&D in your company, maybe you're a health tech company, I think health tech companies usually need more R&D than, I mean, everybody needs R&D, right? So the National Research Fund is part of this initiative as well. The fourth one is infrastructure, and I mean, we all have an idea about how broadband penetration is and how that affects or limits how much innovation or how much digital innovation that we can really bring to the country. And the National Broadband Plan is also directly trying to solve that problem. In December of 2020, I believe, the National Broadband Plan from 2020 to 2025 was launched by the minister. And if you are playing that space as a startup as well, then you should be interested in reading that policy. And then the last one is demand. This is even much more important because Nigeria's government is the largest spending organization in the country. There is no other country, I mean, there's no other organization, whether company or non-government organization, that spends as much as the Nigerian government every year. And what you want to be thinking here is, which is what informed this pillar in the startup policy here, is how can government's expenditure boost demand for innovative products the Nigerian startup leaders or startup CEOs are putting out there. So these core pillars address the main issues and they form the core of how government approaches innovation policy in our country. And if you look at it, you see that those three pillars I mentioned earlier when I started, government, industry, and academia, and the innovation journey itself has already been captured in this policy document. One of the recommendations that we had after that policy was validated by the minister and various MDAs in Nigeria were two things. One is that there had to be a council of innovation on innovation in the country to be able to oversee the direction of how the innovation system in Nigeria grows. The second is that there had to be legislation that actually governed how to engage with how government engages with startups. There's still a lot to be done, but right now the Nigerian startup bill is now being promoted. It's more of now a co-creation between the presidency and the startup ecosystem. I'm also happy to be a part of that. I'm leading the National Assembly engagement and the engagement with the MDAs on the bill. And it's the second recommendation. In that startup bill is also included the Council on Innovation. So there's different between the Council on Science, Tech, and Innovation, but there's a specific Council on Innovation and Startups and technology-driven companies in the country that is going to be headed by the president. The update on that bill is that it has now passed. It has now been approved by the Federal Executive Council, and before the end of this month, a copy of that draft bill will be sent to the leadership of the National Assembly and the leadership and National Assembly, both the green chambers and the red chambers, and then the legislative process in itself begins. Finally, I'm just going to talk briefly before I round up and take questions about there are still a number of laws and a number of policies that Nigeria needs to be able to grow our innovation ecosystem. I was drafting something earlier and I said that even though, I mean, you look at the innovation ecosystem in Nigeria today, especially for startups, and you see that Nigeria raised about $1.7 billion, more than 25% of the amount that was raised in Africa in 2021, last year. And when you really look at that capital that's flowing in for startups, you find out that it is risk-averse capital. It's people who are betting on Africa and saying, you know what, we're going to put money in this place, even though it doesn't look like it. Now, what you want to imagine is how much capital is available to flow into Africa and Nigeria specifically if the policy environment is stable enough and there is strong innovation policies trying to promote startups. innovation in the country. It's going to be massive. And the number of things that we still have to do. But like I've always said, when it comes to society, society does not change wholesale. It takes, it's basically just saying Rome was not built in a day, right? The Patents Act, for example, the last time the Patents Act, which oversees intellectual property in our country today, was last signed and passed and amended or touched in a sense in 1976. I'm willing to place a bet that nobody listening to this was born by that time. But that was the last time nationally the Patents Act was signed into law. And there's a lot of reform that needs to go into that process, because intellectual property is also something that needs to be looked at when it comes to innovation in Nigeria or in any country. A number of other things that we need to look at when it comes to ecosystem, apart from the Patents Act, is this talent development debate that we're talking about. The way that the government's laws think about talent development right now and education, much more importantly, is not particularly focused on innovation and the fourth industrial revolution. And there's a lot of work that we have to do in that space to ensure, if people are graduating, they should easily be able to move into a tech company without having all these innovations in terms of companies that Old School, Handela, a couple of all these development schools or coding schools are doing. We need to be able to tweak our educational system in the country to begin to look at how we can, develop talent while they're in that talent development process of education to fit into that industry. A number of other things that still needs to be done as well. Research and innovation, for example, is just to cap this, right? Our National Research Fund in Nigeria is about 8.5 billion naira. It's under TED Fund. I think I mentioned that earlier. In the US, there are a number of companies, a number of agencies rather, that focus on research. One of them is called National Science Foundation. The budget for the National Science Foundation for 2022 is $8.9 billion US. And the NSF rather is not the organization with the most funding for research, right? They're second in funding for research. There's still other agencies, but one of those organizations is doing 572 times what Nigeria is doing for entire research for a whole year. We need to be able to look at the impact of all these things as well. And that's when we put all these things together and innovation ecosystem starts to grow. And you as a stakeholder in the ecosystem can be able to plug in and usher in prosperity for our country. Overall, innovation breeds prosperity. And the layman way to say that is, we cannot keep doing the things that we're doing over and over again in the same manner and expect anything to change. If we want more food, we have to innovate around how we plant our food. If we want better roads, we have to innovate around how we construct our roads. If we want better payment systems, we already innovated around how people get paid. But this innovation and higher standard of living that the people experience or want to experience is brought about by changing the way and making things better, changing the way things are done, making things better, and that's what innovation is about. Thank you very much. Edwin?
Thank you, Jude. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. You've been very, very fantastic. I really, really love hearing your voice. I don't know how much you say. I enjoy. No, I think so. It's fantastic when you think about it. You see that there are a lot of these programs and funds are available to startups that you should be able to, that are available to them to even take advantage of for different reasons. And a lot of times we even find out that people don't know about it. People that know about it don't even pay attention. Don't really don't invest their time in actually following up on these things and seeing how they can be able to plug their startup into it. And it's unfortunate, really. I'm glad we're able to really expand it, the role of innovation and startup development and how government plays its part, and I really understand it, and it's really, really interesting. I really thank you for your time. So at this point, I want to ask anyone, does anyone have a question? Anybody have a question, please? Online streaming, we have hundreds of people that are watching different platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. Can someone, is there a question? Does anyone have a question? With my team. Before we even get there, I think I just want to ask you, really, what's the process? What can startups do? I mean, in Nigeria, we know how volatile it is when it comes to policy development, and the perception is that government does not consult startups first before they bring up some, policies. Now, at a time when this policy has been drafted or even been implemented, what can startups do to be able to have more of a say in how government really, how they can engage government, how they can be able to maybe immune themselves or even prepare themselves for this vast change in, policies.
Yeah. So I mean, I would say that there's still work that needs to be done when it comes to making these things known. In fact, after we finish with this policy process, one of our recommendations as well for the federal government was to engage in a communication, we call it strategic communications. If you look at that document, if you look at a policy, you're likely to find that as part of it. Strategic communications to the ecosystem and to the stakeholders. And the implementation of that requires that the ministry, or at the very least minister, is involved in communicating that this policy exists and this is what the government is doing about it, and this is what the update is on the implementation. I suppose that is not being done. But what I would advise for startups is there are advisory companies that are coming up these days. I know of Tech Hive Advisory. I do a couple of engagement for them. I know of API as well. API Intelligence here in Abuja, I think in Ventures Park. They analyze these policies and how it affects startups, and what the policies are, and what the government is looking to do. So subscribing to one of those platforms as a startup would take away a lot of the money that you would spend on GR. Because these days, when startups raise a lot of money, one of the things that they start thinking about is government relations and set up a GR department within their company. But if for startups that have not raised a lot of money and are playing in spaces where policy somersaults can literally kill the businesses, you want to be able to subscribe to some of these advisory companies who provide this kind of advisory. In fact, if you go to API's website right now, the NDIPS that we wrote is on their website, and there's an analysis for that. So subscribing to them, getting insights from these kind of platforms would get you ready for any kind of policy innovation that the government wants to do. The other point I would also say is when these kind of things are done, there's usually private sector representation. And private sector representation, goes from two people coming from the private sector to one person showing up to people saying, you know what, it's government, I'm not going to go. Republicraft, for example, we make it a point of it to attend this kind of sessions. We consult for the federal ministry at a reasonable level. So we're involved in saying this is how the private sector will think about this kind of policy that is being drafted. And in instances where we're consulting on that kind of policy, we also make it a point of duty to be sure that we're drafting policy that works for the ecosystem. So if you're a startup founder and you have a GR department, then beyond engaging policymakers, you also want to know what exactly they're thinking about, what policies they're drafting, and what policies that they're validating. The last one I would say is, I think this is not obvious, but I think the tech ecosystem in Nigeria is getting to that point where people within the National Assembly who oversee the executive are responsible actually for overseeing these policies and how it affects the baseline, right? So in banking and finance, for example, you have senators and House of Representative members who are in the Senate and who are in the House of Reps who are looking out for the banking industry and saying if this law is being passed, how does it affect the entire banking sector? If this agency is passing this law or making or announcing this policy, what exactly does that mean for banks and people who have accounts and stuff like that? And I think the technical system has matured up to that point where there has to be people who are within National Assembly overseeing these agencies and trying to look out for the ecosystem and say if an agency announces a policy that impacts on startups negatively, they should be able to get a summons that sends them to the National Assembly to come and explain how that startup impacts, how that policy impacts in startups, what exactly they are thinking, if they should reverse that policy or not, if they should call a roundtable where all the stakeholders are on board, and a number of all these kind of things that help build our society. So, I mean, that would be my answer to how I think startups should engage. For companies that raise lots of money, have GR departments and government relations advisors, I think it's usually easier for those kind of companies. But what's much more important is how is the government thinking? How can we change that?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Does anybody else have a question? Does anyone have a question? None? Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Jude. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your effort and transferring of knowledge, and I really appreciate it. I'm surprised you didn't mention the fact that you're running for a seat in Osun State.
This is yeah. I mean, I'm running for office. I didn't know I was coming to say that.
Sorry, someone should. I think I was supposed to have shared our LinkedIn, our Facebook, all our handles and links, so you can just follow us. And please join our Techbiz community so that you can be able to. I mean, conversations. I mean, you are big on innovation and development and so on. So you just join our Techbiz community. You can be able to share any information you have on any policies and stuff. You can be able to share it in the group, and I'm sure that there are lots of others that are willing to listen to you and hear what you have to say. Can someone share the links on the group, on the chat, please? Someone from the technical team, please. Okay, there are. Anyways, so thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much, and I appreciate it.
Great work you're doing. Great work.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we'll see you again some other time. I hope you attend next week's one as a listener this time, hopefully. I really hope that we can see more of you later on. So thank you very much for everyone that's joined this call. Thank you for your time, your efforts, whatever your space, giving us a space to be able to transfer knowledge to you from one expert to other upcoming experts. All right. So thank you very much. I hope to see you guys again next week. Thank you for your time, and have a wonderful week.
All right. Bye.
See you.